winter meeting's around the corner, I think it is time to start the discussion about why the Cubs just are not spending like they should be. We're talking about Chicago, the third biggest market in the United States. You have your Dodgers, you have your Mets, you have your Yankees, then you have the Cubs who are right behind them. And sure, they aren't generating the same amount of revenue as those teams. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But hey, there is money there, yet the Cubs decide to operate like a mid-market team. Why aren't they spending more money? I think it's the perfect time to discuss that. You're watching Second City Sports Talk. Now, in recent news, before we go to the big question of why the Cubs aren't spending like they should be, we have to look at Marquee Sports Network. When it launched in 2020, this was supposed to be the home of everything Chicago Cubs. You were going to get exclusive content, all the games, and just get the whole shebang with the Cubs. Unfortunately, things have not turned out the right way, and I want to talk about that. Recently, an article came out in the Chicago Sun-Times by Jeff Agrest, great writer. I suggest you check him out over there. Marquee is not doing well. Now, 2 months ago, Marquee and Comcast, there was a big fight, of course, with Comcast and Marquee to even carry the network, but Marquee has moved to the most expensive tier of their sports package. Hence, you'd think the network is doing well. However, they are really struggling. A lot of layoffs to report. Dane Penning, the GM of Marquee Sports Network, was just laid off after being hired in 2024. And they basically furloughed their entire digital media and writing department. They got rid of Tony Andracki, such a good guy when it comes to digital media with the Cubs. They got rid of Andy Martinez, one of their reporters, and then Zoe Grossman, another writer. So digital media department, writing department, gone from Marquee. The big issue here, you have Colin Faulkner, who is the Cubs chief commercial officer, somebody with no TV experience. He is going to take over in that GM role, and he will be overseeing game coverage, production, and marketing, as well as on-air talent. This is a problem. You have a non-TV guy coming into a TV station that's already struggling and taking over. There is no separation. You do not have your church and state separation. It is now under one. The Cubs control all the programming at Marquee. They basically have a say, and there's just no independent journalism here. As a journalism major, I find that to be quite troubling. Marquee Sports Network cannot accurately portray and talk about the Cubs if the Cubs are programming the network. Look, even though Marquee is making nowhere near what the Cubs thought the network would make when they signed on in 2020, it should not affect this team. And look, this is the fourth most valuable franchise in baseball, estimated to be worth over $4.6 billion. Of course, that's coming from Forbes. Look, in 2024, the Cubs made $3.25 million per game. That was the third most out of all 30 teams. Cubs tickets are crazy expensive. They're the fourth most expensive average ticket price in all of baseball. Their concessions are crazy. We're talking about, over $7 for a hot dog, over $10 for a beer. Those are just basic amenities that every, fan of age, of course, can have access to. If those are expensive, if the average ticket price is over $50 a game, this team should have plenty of money to go out there and support the fans. And look, it appears as if Cubs ownership may be taking advantage of those fans. With astronomical ticket prices, beer prices, and just a fan experience, you would think the Cubs would be putting more of their revenue into the team. That isn't the case, though. You go back to the spring, the viral tweet by Brooks Gate, the revenue chart, the money teams bring in compared to the money teams actually put into the team. In 2024, the Cubs generated over $584 million of revenue, good for third most in Major League Baseball. However, they only put $213 million of it actually into their luxury tax payroll. That's 36% of their revenue actually went into the team, 26th in baseball. That is a terrible number for the fourth most valuable team, the third biggest market in baseball. $313 million of profit were not put back into the team. The Cubs are in the bottom third of the league. Teams like the Pirates, Marlins, White Sox, Rockies, teams that don't spend any money, the Cubs are around them when it comes to money made and then money put back into the team. And to make matters worse, The Cubs cut payroll from 2024 to 2025. Now, they had the 10th highest payroll in 2024 at about $234 million. If you do remember, the Cubs accidentally went into the luxury tax in 2024 after an accounting error. And look, that decision may have set them back in 2025. Look, the Cubs decreased payroll in 2025 by around $7 million. If you look at the final numbers in terms of payroll, they were only paying about $227 million, 11th in baseball. That's a 3% decrease. And look, the final numbers I'm about to show you are just ridiculous. The Cubs made $506 million in profit in 2023. Then they made $584 million in profit in 2024. Of course, it's a 15% increase right there. Yet, they cut payroll from 2024 to 2025 by over 3%. That is unacceptable. You are making records amount of money, yet bringing down payroll. Just adding on to why there's no excuse for this team to be not spending money, at the sponsorships. The Cubs made over $100 million alone from sponsorships in 2025. The Motorola patch that they added in late 2024, that big patch on the side of the jersey, that alone is worth over $22 million. This team is bringing in close to $600 million in revenue, yet they are cutting payroll. Why? I'm about to show you. So why aren't the Cubs acting like a top dog, like, the team they should be, the big market they are, the value of the franchise, the brand? I think there's two main reasons. I don't agree with these reasons, but I think they are the most logical explanations. The first reason I think that the Cubs are just not acting like the big dog they should be is the competition in their division. The Cubs are surrounded by small market teams in the NL Central. Look at the Pirates, Reds, Brewers, Cardinals. None of these teams just have the same financial backbone that the Cubs do. I want to start with the Brewers. This team is worth around $1.7 billion. That's 20th in baseball. They only made about $334 million in revenue in 2024. That's $250 million less than the Cubs. Small market team does not have the same financial backbone as the Cubs. Then you have the Reds and Pirates, two very similar teams as well. They're both valued at around $1.3 billion. That's 26th and 27th in baseball. They both made around $325 million in revenue in 2024. Again, not making a lot of money, not valued the same as the Cubs. Theoretically, the Cubs, of course, have this backbone. They have such a financial edge over these teams, yet they're just choosing not to utilize it. I think the rationale behind Tom Ricketts and ownership is that, hey, we're not going to blow these teams out of the water when it comes to spending. We are going to spend a little bit more than these teams, albeit you have the ability to spend way more, but you're not going to do that. We're going to spend close to these teams, but still outspend them, and that small little gap should be enough. We shouldn't have to spend Cohen money in New York. We shouldn't have to spend Dodgers money to beat these teams because they have limited resources. If we just spend a little bit more than them, develop good players, have a good farm system, that should be enough to beat these teams. And evidently so, spending a little more than these teams is just flat out not enough. The Brewers spend significantly less money than the Cubs, yet have beaten this team out for first place over the last 10 years. It's a mess. It does not work. You need to act like the top dog, like the Mets, like the Yankees, like the Dodgers. Maybe not spend boatloads like them, but still spend enough. Act like the big market team you are, because clearly spending a little more money than these teams is not doing enough. The second reason as to why the Cubs are not spending right now has to do with what lies ahead in 2027. Now, on December 1st, 2026, the CBA collective bargaining agreement between the Players Association and owners is set to expire, meaning we are probably headed toward an ugly lockout in 2027. If you're an owner, if you're Tom Ricketts, why are you going to spend money not knowing the future economic landscape of Major League Baseball? Who knows what the landscape of Major League Baseball looks like in 2027 and beyond? There could be a salary cap. There could be a salary floor. There might not even be a luxury tax. Owners are going to be considering these things before spending big money prior to this looming lockout. Why invest significant capital into a player if you don't know if that deal, that contract could affect you negatively in the long term. This uncertainty is why owners like Tom Ricketts are choosing not to spend right now. Again, I don't agree with it, but it's the most logical conclusion to come to. They don't want to spend because they do not know what that money is going to look like in 2027 and beyond. Again, I do not agree with these two stances. I think the Cubs should be blowing the other teams in their division out the water in terms of spending. I don't think a potential lockout should deter this team from spending as well. They're the most logical answers. I don't agree with them, but they make sense. And I do want to end on one positive. It was reported a few days ago by Bruce Levine, one of the Cubs' main reporters for 670 The Score and Marquee Sports Network, funny right there, that this team has around $50 to $60 million to spend this year. And that number takes them right toward the first tier of the luxury tax, which is this self-imposed limitation when it comes to spending. Again, do not agree with that. This team should be in the luxury tax, especially considering what the roster looks like in 2027 and beyond. They don't have a lot of contracts on the books. There is a lot of open money after this year, but still, encouraging sign. This team supposedly has the money to go out there, get a Framber Valdez, give an Alex Bregman, but based on how Tom Ricketts and the front office operates, I just don't see it happening.